welcome back to another episode of HR Tech Edge, the video podcast where we bring you the latest trends and insights of HR and technology. I'm Bhakti, your host. Today we have a special guest with us, Mark Criswell, co-founder of Scalable Software. Mark is here to discuss the fascinating world of employee monitoring tool, the evolving trends in hybrid workspaces, and how businesses can optimize employees' well-being. Welcome to the show, Mark. How are you doing today?
Very well. Thank you.
So let's dive in without any further ado. So, over the past decades, we've seen a significant evolution in employee monitoring. How exactly has the adoption of employee monitoring tool evolved over the past decade?
Well, employee monitoring obviously is nothing new. Employers have been monitoring employees since probably the first employee ever showed up. And more recently, the introduction of flexi time and gate tracking tools and so on, they've become quite commonplace. But what we've seen maybe the last 10 years or so is the introduction of employee monitoring that happens through the workstation. So tools that track human interaction with applications, keystrokes, mouse clicks, applications that are in focus, and some of them even go so far as to screenshot at what you're looking at while you're typing the keys and so on. So some of them have been quite invasive.
That's quite an evolution. So speaking of remote work, how do employees monitoring tool help businesses manage remote and hybrid workplaces?
Well, I think the key really is in the question there, which is how do you manage remote employees? Monitoring someone's activity at the keyboard is a very narrow aspect of employee management. If that's all you're looking at, it's not going to be long before people start finding ways to simulate keyboard and mouse activity. And I mean, just quite recently, there were quite a lot of press coverage on Wells Fargo firing some of their employees because they were using mouse jigglers to simulate mouse activity. If all you want to see is whether people are using the keyboard and the mouse, then you're going to see a lot of that. Managing people is something very different, and it becomes significantly more challenging when they're hybrid employees. To manage people, really, what you're after is you're trying to make them more efficient and, everything that falls under that category. You're trying to help them work through complex workflows more efficiently. You want to ensure they don't work unnecessarily hard and cause early stage burnout and that kind of behavior. So the definition of management in the context of these employee monitoring tools is quite a broad church. And I think that what we've seen so far with these employee monitoring tools is really quite limited in terms of its ability to manage people.
Managing people is actually difficult, but it's interesting to see how these tools are shaping the future of work. So, but what are the alternative approach or what are some alternative strategies to employee monitoring that promote engagement and performance in hybrid workplaces?
I think once companies move beyond the simple notion of are people active at their keyboards or not, and they start looking at what it takes to get an organization running as efficiently as possible, the requirements for the tools expand quite rapidly. I mean, for example, one of the things that you desperately need to find out, particularly in a hybrid working environment where people are working remotely for a substantial percentage of their time, is you want to see whether they're getting digital friction events. And by that, I mean things like unnecessary notifications, distractions on their workstation, random crashes that don't get reported, other sort of forms of slowdown within the work environment. You want to see whether, the workflows that they undertake to get their jobs done are done efficiently. You want to ensure that they're using the tools that you've designed for them. There's a lot of things play into this definition of how you make an organization more efficient and how do you manage the employees to make them more efficient. And consequently, the needs for the monitoring tools expand. So to your point about how are these alternate strategies evolving, there's a category of technology known as a DEX tool. DEX stands for Digital Employee Experience. And DEX tools capture a lot more than just simple keystrokes and mouse clicks. They're looking at the kind of things that I described. How well does an employee execute their workflows? Are they interrupted by things? Is their environment stable? Are they engaging well with other people at risk of burnout through out of hours activity and that kind of stuff? All of that stuff rolled up to give a holistic view of the opportunities to help the employees work more efficiently.
So you just mentioned about organizations' effectiveness and, building on that, I'm curious about the shift in business trends and attitude. So with the rise of office badging and bare minimum Mondays, some are concerned about the forced return to the office. What are your take on this trend?
Yeah, that's a very important question. Obviously, there's a lot of tension as hybrid working has taken off. Some of the more traditional approaches to management really have not been able to keep pace, and which is why you've seen many of these return to office mandates. Now, some of them are dressed up as, well, we need opportunities for people to collaborate and so on, and, osmotic learning and so on. And sure, some of that, without question, happens more effectively when people are in the office. But equally, and, one of the ironies is that, when people are back in the office and collaborating with others, quite often they're collaborating through conference tools like Teams and Slack and so on. So there's no real difference in their behavior patterns, whether they're in the office or whether they're not. And I think that's reflective of this sort of, traditional attitude towards management where, get people in the office, return to office. It's the only way we can be certain they're working. Paradoxically, there's a lot more that can be determined about how efficient an employee is working by looking at the sort of the digital exhaust that comes from their interaction with their workstation. And this is how things are beginning to evolve. Businesses are beginning to realize, actually, if all they're doing is focusing on what we call presenteeism, is someone there in the office, they're missing a whole load of useful data points about how effective an employee is. And once they focus on those data points, it really doesn't matter where the employee is. Now, from an employee point of view, their attitudes are also absolutely critical in this, because employee monitoring software, the traditional keystroke, mouse click, are you busy at your workstation type things, type tools, not very well received. It creates a sort of a trust issue. The moment you give an employee the opportunity to learn how efficiently they're working, whether they're experiencing distractions that aren't obvious from their own work, but are visible within their digital exhaust and so on, opportunities to work more efficiently, they're more willing to embrace them, particularly if in embracing these digital employee experience tools, these DEX tools, it gives them more latitude to work remotely. Because obviously, what we've seen in this return to office hybrid working tussle, employees, largely saying, look, I'm very efficient when I work from home. A statistic that we picked up from one of our surveys just recently, we did a survey about 8 or 9 months ago, something like that. 55% of the knowledge workers that we interviewed said they would be willing to accept DEX tools to sort of monitor their work efficiency, their productivity, if it allowed them to work in a hybrid mode.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So as you just mentioned about this workstation practices, there's a new buzzword about productivity paranoia. So what is the productivity paranoia, and how does it influence the use of employee monitoring tools?
I think productivity paranoia is just it's just an extension of this notion of return to office mandates, where traditional management practices where you can't see the person, you're not sure they're working. That's the whole productivity paranoia. The truth is, for most organizations, whether people are in the office or whether they're not, you don't have any sense of whether they're being more productive or effective. All you can see is whether they're in the office or not. There's a lot more to be learnt by having an effective sort of window onto how efficiently they're using the equipment and the software that they've been provided, and to offer opportunities to improve things for them, to eliminate notifications, to eliminate digital friction, to identify ways in which they can move through digital processes more efficiently. If organizations focus on that aspect of a person's sort of work pattern, they can see enormous improvements in efficiency.
Yeah, I just want to understand, as you just mentioned about productivity and the impacts that these tools have. can employee monitoring tool lead to increase of productivity, or do they have some opposite effect? Can you explain more on that?
I think if you look at the traditional employee monitoring tools, they have no benefit on productivity whatsoever. None. All you're doing is seeing whether someone is active at at their workstation. You don't know how efficiently they're working. You don't know if they're experiencing digital friction. You don't know if they can improve their work processes. And quite often, as we've seen, people can find ways to simulate activity at the workstation. So simple employee monitoring tools are of no benefit whatsoever. DEX tools that look at an employee's digital experience and look at the way in which their interaction with the technology and applications they've been provided is, it works compared to others, opportunities to streamline it, to streamline that interaction. Those tools can be profoundly beneficial in terms of productivity. And that's really what we've seen. The employers that invest in sort of, if you like, second generation monitoring, digital employee experience tooling, are the ones that get material and measurable improvements in productivity.
All right. Can you elaborate more on this concept, digital employee productivity or digital employee experience?
Yeah. So this is a class of tooling that's emerged in the last few years that is, I hesitate to call it next generation of monitoring, because it's much, much more than that. But essentially it's born out of the shortcomings of historical employee monitoring tools. And the emphasis is less about checking whether someone's active at their keyboard, but much more focused on how you can improve the work that those employees are doing, or their effectiveness. So it really focuses on three key areas. It focuses on efficiency. The things that they've been asked to do, are they doing them efficiently? So are there opportunities to improve a workflow and what have you? The other thing it looks at is, are they being sort of interrupted by digital friction events? Are there things that are occurring during the course of their day that impact them? Crashes, slowdowns, other forms of sort of digital event that impact their workflows. And finally, and very importantly, are they operating in an environment that's configured cost effectively? Are they employing the technology that they should? Are they using the technology that they should be using? Do they have the latest versions? Do they have equipment that matches their requirements? Do they need hardware refreshes? Can they push them off for an extra few years? So digital employee experience tends to focus on those kind of broad areas, which are far more beneficial than just checking to see whether someone is active at the keyboard or not.
All right. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So Acumen is the product that Scalable Software has.
Yeah, we have a digital employee experience tool of our own. It's called Acumen. We have two modules. We've got an Acumen for Endpoint Intelligence and an Acumen for Employee Productivity. Both address different aspects of the whole digital employee experience space. But absolutely, we are absolutely in this business, and we've got technology that we've developed that customers can use and enjoy.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I am very curious to know, if as an employee, does it provide any feedback that these are the parameters that you need to work on to be more productive or to be more efficient, or, the broader parameters that you just mentioned? Does it give open employee feedback?
Yes. So there's a very broad range of capabilities within modern digital experience tools. Talking about employee feedback, for example, that's absolutely one of them. We call it sentiment analysis. So you can ask employees questions about, is this software that you've been provided meeting your requirements? Are you experiencing digital friction events, that kind of thing? So you can get that kind of subjective feedback from the employees. But equally, we get a lot of objective feedback, so we can detect if an employee has experienced a crash in an application at their workstation, whether they've experienced a notification overload, whether during the course of a workflow that they're working through, they've had to deviate off to use tools that are unexpected as part of that workflow. All of those things are surfaced within Acumen and presented, line of business managers with recommendations on how employees can improve how the business can improve the experience for employees, and what the business can do to help their employees work more efficiently.
And Indeed, feedback is very vital. So, finally, let's touch on the leadership strategies. I mean, I just happened to check your LinkedIn and you've ideated and initiated a lot of new companies. And with that, you've always moved on. So, how can a business leader create a supportive environment that fosters productivity without relying heavily on monitoring tools?
It's was one of those enduring management questions. I think one of the key things you have to do is to ensure that your employees remain as engaged as possible, because there's no greater source for ideas inside an organization than the people that are, working on the technology that you're building or working on the processes that you're developing. Which is why, as you mentioned earlier, certainly in large organizations, providing subjective sentiment feedback from employees is so crucial. You can get a brilliant picture of how an organization is evolving, and understanding the things that you should be doing better, either as an organization or as a manager yourself. So certainly Scalable is very much into that. We try as hard as we possibly can to ensure our teams can collaborate as well as they can, that provide maximum amount of feedback. And we've got quite a democratized process for the development of our technology and our business in general.
Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing your invaluable insights. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, and thank you all for tuning into HR Tech. I hope we had an amazing episode, and stay tuned for more such episodes at Tuesdays with Trailblazers, and don't forget for the latest updates. Until next time, signing off, your host Bhakti.